Right. Hello and welcome to today's episode. I'm very excited to have our first guest speaker for this season with Carissa Menard. She's a certified child life specialist. And I say that funny because right before I was making sure I said her name right. And then I blinked out for a second. I was like, oh gosh, I'm going to do the same thing I do with some of my clients where I'm like, tell me about your, we call safe space. And
Mhm.
I with all the people I do EMDR with and I talk about their safe space, it's sometimes I'm like, yours is it's called this. Thank you so much, Carissa, for joining me today. I am so stoked to get to know you, to have the audience get to know you, and just share a little bit about yourself. So I'm going to ask you from the get-go, like just tell me a little bit about yourself, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you came to become connected to the childhood cancer community.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's such an honor to be here to speak with you. And um, I came to know and be a part of the childhood cancer survivor community, thankfully, through my experience as a teenager. So I was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia when I was 13. And my treatment was about 2.5 years long. So I finished when I was about 15 and a half. And so was entered into the whirlwind hell of cancer. and
Yeah.
um, and what was interesting about my experience is I knew in my soul that I had cancer before I was even diagnosed. I was so sick for a while leading up to it. And I was 13. So I was very aware of what cancer was, aware of my body at that point too, and knew deep down that something was seriously wrong. And so the confirmation of that was extremely difficult. Um, but some like beautiful blessings that have come from that whole experience is that when you're going through pediatric, cancer, most likely, depending on which hospital you're at. So sorry, 1 second. Happen. Sorry about that. My dog got a little excited about my cancer journey. So during my treatment, I was connected to a certified child life specialist. So that's actually how I came to know of the field of child life. And most children and teens, when they are diagnosed, they are connected with a child life specialist. The only time that you're not is usually in like an adult setting, hospital, or like a rural
Mhm.
kind of more community hospital, but most are. Thankfully, my hospital had a lot of services in place. And I actually had two specialists that worked with me, and I just came to fall in love with the field. It was the only thing that brought me joy in the hospital. I was terrified of everything that had to do with my cancer treatment. Every piece and part of it brought up so much anxiety for me and
Yeah.
so much fear. And um, the only thing that really brought me joy when I was hospitalized throughout my treatment for those 2.5 years was when my child life specialist would walk in the room and bring like a new activity or sit down and just talk to me or prepare me for something new that was going to be happening. And I just really felt like I had them as a strong advocate to support me and guide me through that whole experience. So because of that, it was my passion. I decided at 13 that I too was going to be a certified child life specialist. And after I graduated from high school, I got my bachelor's in psychology and my minor in child development, and then went on to get my master's degree in child life. So I kind of like decided my destiny from the age of 13, going through cancer treatment, of what I wanted my goal and purpose to be. And that was to serve other kids and teens going through difficult medical experiences, not just cancer, but whatever type of medical
Yeah.
experience or grief that they might be going through. And since then, I've worked at a children's hospital in San Diego called Rady Children's Hospital. I was there for a little over 5 years working on the rehab unit, supporting kids through traumatic brain injuries and spinal cord injuries, and have since moved on to work at a pediatric chiropractor office now. And I also provide child life services virtually through a remote community organization. So my field has grown to kind of be outside of the hospital setting now, and I've kind of
Yeah.
hopped onto that train as well. And then kind of more recently, I've been really trying to utilize my knowledge and experience of being a child life specialist and children's coach and coping support professional to teach kids breath work. So that's kind of where I'm at now, as well as being able to utilize my skills to teach kids how to use their breath to calm themselves no matter what difficult thing they are going through. So yeah, that's kind of my life 13 and on since cancer, and it's brought many trials but also many beautiful experiences as well.
Wow. So I want to go back just a couple of, few minutes ago. You basically said, I knew I had cancer. Even at the
Mhm.
age of 13, you just had this like feeling
Mhm.
that you just knew it was cancer.
Mhm.
What was that like when you found out you heard the words you have cancer?
Absolutely horrible. I would say I have like 6 or 7, like, really prominent traumatic memories of those 2.5-year period, and one of the most was the confirmation of me having cancer. The actual day that I found out was I was in ballet class, so I was a ballerina my entire life and
Mhm.
was somewhat after the fact, but it was a lot harder to dance during and after treatment. But before that, I was in a pre-professional ballet company, and I was in ballet class and I had some blood work done a few days beforehand. And my dad walked in mid class and just said, "Hey, I need you to come outside." And it was in that exact moment I knew he's bringing me outside to tell me that my like results came back and that I had cancer. And he brought me to the parking lot, and I immediately started screaming and fell on my knees. I just knew right in that moment. Brings me to tears even still talking about it.
Me
But
too.
um, and yeah, I got in the car and my parents, they drove me to the hospital, and my mom sat with me and told me what was happening, and was very much comforting and wanted me to know that I would be okay. But I was terrified because my worst fear and thought had come true. And the first person I met with at the hospital when we got um, checked in and fully like admitted, my parents were brought into a separate room, and my child life specialist came and sat with me, and she sat with me the whole time while my parents were in the meeting going over what was the plan to come. And she just sat and told me what was happening and told me what they were talking about and was very honest with me, and also just sat with me to just talk about dance and talk about normal teenage girl stuff. um, and it was really comforting to have someone be there with me and also prepare me for what's to come and to be honest about what my parents were talking about too in like the other room. So that's kind of
Yeah.
how I found out, and it was really traumatic because I had this feeling that something was wrong and then it was confirmed. It's something that I've kind of carried with me throughout the rest of my life now, of do I always trust that fear in me? Because
Mhm.
sometimes it's not true. And that's a
Mhm.
great thing to have those fears not be true of, the worst case scenario. But because of that confirmation of that fear when I was 13 being such a prominent memory for me, it's been really hard for me to trust my gut and know what
Mhm.
is real and what's not, anymore. And so I've done a lot of therapeutic work through that as well.
Yeah, as a parent, that's actually, a conversation that I've had with a lot of other moms. It's, when because of a diagnosis, there's a certain level of anxiety, and we all have like, our intuition feels like anxiety, right? Like I have this
Yes.
intuition that something is going to happen or whatever, right? And there's a certain level of anxiety with that. And it's hard to begin to decipher between anxiety and intuition because I feel the same. And it's like people say, just trust your gut. It's like, I can't trust my gut anymore. My gut's like, it's all jumbled up now because of everything that's happened. And I'm like, I can't trust myself. Now I'm just overreacting every time. It's like, oh, I have a pain in my bone. And you're like, you know? Um,
Exactly, exactly. That is spot on, exactly what I've been learning and dealing with, ever since.
yes. So being 13, I mean, that's a pretty critical developmental stage, right? Um, when you were going through treatment, at what point did you become aware, or did you even become aware that um, you might have had some mental health struggles during that?
Um, I would say pretty early on. I already had anxiety as like a child, just kind of at baseline. I was more of like an anxious, more worried kid before all of this had happened. I had already had a lot of anxiety about sickness like before this too. I was always terrified of being sick. So my mom already knew that this was like the worst kid to get cancer was the kid who was
Mhm.
terrified of being sick.
Mhm.
Um, and so pretty early on, I was very, very anxious. And also pretty early on, I witnessed the death of a lot of peers who were on the same clinical trial as myself and the same age as myself. And so um, it was pretty clear after the first death had happened that I had grieved and witnessed, as a 13-year-old, seeing like another 13-year-old die from what I have. My parents put me in counseling, pretty quickly. I think that was a month or two into my treatment was when the first patient that I knew had died. And so that's when I started doing some counseling because they knew this is going to be a rough couple years if we're already a month in and we
Yeah.
already know someone that we've gotten close to in just this month that has, passed from the same thing. So thankfully they got me an incredible counselor that pretty much saw me biweekly or monthly, I would say, for almost those entire 2 years. So I was in counseling very regularly. But I also didn't know exactly what anxiety was still and how to cope with it. So before I had seen the counselor, I would have those feelings of like my stomach just felt twisted, or I just felt lightheaded, or just like hyperactive and I couldn't sit still, or I'd like that like panicky feeling, but I didn't know how to
Mhm.
identify it and verbalize it. I would just go to my mom and start crying, and she'd be like, "Why are you crying?" And I'm like, "I don't know, I'm just sad." And I couldn't express my anxiety. I couldn't put it into words. And so that was really hard, was not knowing where to put my anxiety. And so counseling helped me to work through that and to be able to have tools in place to help with that. But because I was still a kid, I still didn't have the ability to communicate it. So that was, I think, one of the hardest things throughout my treatment, even with counseling like in place, was I had the tools to support myself, but I still didn't have the cognitive ability to really like discuss and have those like adult conversations of sharing what my
Yeah.
anxiety is and what it feels like and where it's coming from. And that was really hard, was just not having a place to put it. And so that really weighed on me throughout time too.
Yeah, that's the challenging part of those early teen years, even like just teenagers in general. uh, That's a big struggle to be able to verbalize
Mhm,
emotions, what you're physically feeling, and connect the dots, right? Like, oh,
mhm.
hey, I think I'm feeling this way because I've got this thought and I've got this going on. It's just, oh my gosh, my body just feels off. And like that
Yeah,
flooded feeling, right? Your body is just in overdrive. Your central nervous
exactly.
system is in overdrive. And you're like, I don't know why I feel this way. And it just feels horrible. That's all I know.
Yeah, and I think what was hard too is my parents were scared of those feelings because they were told at the beginning of my treatment, and I was told as well, that my mindset is going to determine potentially how this goes, which was a lot of pressure to put on a 13-year-old, that
Mm,
I
yeah.
potentially could have the power to have my treatment not be successful. And I don't shame or feel upset towards my doctor for saying that. I do think that there is some truth to the fact that our mindset can really help our body and its function, but I think I took it too literally as a teenager. As a kid, I took it too concretely because that's how my thinking is. I'm
Yeah.
still kind of moving into that like more abstract thought, but I was at the like the beginning stages of that, as a 13-year-old. So I took it really concretely of my brain has the power to, make this work or not work. And so My parents also took it somewhat concretely as well, so they were scared of me ever feeling anxious, so whenever I did come to them with anxiety, it brought a lot of fear into them as well, and so then it was this kind of, like, cyclical pattern of, not wanting to talk about our anxiety because we don't want it to be there, because if it is there, then it could change things, and it kinda started this pattern as well.
I love though that your parents were so proactive and did put you in
Yes.
therapy. Like,
Yes.
that is a hard thing for parents to do. Um, obviously, like, I put my kid in as soon as possible.
Mhm.
But that's because I'm a therapist, I'm like, "Here you go. You'll benefit from this. Even if you're not talking, it's fine." Um, but it's just interesting because a lot of, parents wait to see the signs and the symptoms that they're struggling.
Mhm.
Um, and sometimes that takes a while before people really realize, like, or the kid is, like, behaving in a certain way and you're able to identify, "Oh, here's a change," right?
Mhm.
Even as a parent now, like, my kid had surgery several months ago, and as soon as that surgery was over, there was, like, these behavioral shifts that had changed, and I was like, "Uh-huh, okay. I'm noticing a pattern." Um, Luckily, we had just gotten him back into therapy, and, um but it's been one of those, like, I'm noticing these, like, check, 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 all these behaviors that are now linked to that trauma, which is linked to years of medical trauma, right? So, um,
Mhm. Exactly.
in as a teenager, would you say, um, that did you lose a lot of friends, I guess? Like, not to the cancer battle, but, like,
Mhm.
your real life, like, pre-cancer diagnosis friends and that social circle,
Mhm.
did all of that change during treatment? And then how did that change after treatment?
Yes. Yeah, 100%. I think it's one of the most critical periods of your life when you're building your sense of identity, and a lot of that is done through your peers. Um, and they also were all 13. They didn't know how to
Mhm.
deal with a friend that had cancer. They're very, caught up in their own world of building their own identities too. And so um it could be so easy to call my friends, being selfish or like be unempathetic. And that's how it felt at the time when I was going through it. But as I've gotten older, I realized that they were 13 too. They
Yeah.
they didn't know what to do, just like I didn't know how to cope with it either. Um, so to answer your question though, yes, I definitely, didn't get to engage and participate in normal social activities like all of my friends got to. My focus was just on surviving, and especially for leukemia, those first 9 months of treatment are extremely intense, and it's a lot of high dose chemotherapy, so my immune system was pretty much at 0 for almost the entire first year of my treatment, and I spent, over 150 days in the hospital as well, so I couldn't really see people because I had
Yeah.
to protect myself and protect my immune system, and then I was also hospitalized a lot. um, so my social relationships suffered because of just lack of connection, of physically being with my friends. And on top of it, my treatment was in 2005, so we didn't have technology like we do now. We didn't have FaceTime or Instagram and all those things. I had I think it was AOL instant message, so I would instant message my friends.
Yes.
I think I had just gotten my first cell phone, and it was like those tiny little flip phones. So like I would text occasionally, but like you only got 200 texts a month or something. So like
Mhm.
it was very minimal communication physically, but then also, just in general because we didn't have the technology then as well. So I really was distant from my friends from multiple aspects. Um, and afterwards, I think what was really difficult was my mindset on and my view on life had completely shifted. I mean, my identity became, because it was during that critical period of building a sense of who I am, my identity became a cancer kid. I am a cancer survivor. I had cancer and my whole life was about cancer. And it was really hard for me to kind of move on from that and see myself as more than a cancer survivor, even though that carries so much incredible weight and should be recognized. I didn't see myself really much beyond that.
Mhm.
And because of that, it made it hard to identify and relate to other teens and to other people. And they were concerned about, um, their hair and the boy that they kissed or homecoming dances and all those things. But I was still concerned about, will my next blood draw come back and show that I relapsed? Like that was what I was thinking about all the time, during
Mhm.
high school. So my thought processes and my fears were so much different and were so much more weighty than the typical, teen fears and anxieties and things like that. So I had a really hard time just uh like relating to my peers. Um and that was kind of carried with me, throughout high school. And when I went to college, I had this decision of, I'm going to go to college and I'm not going to be the cancer kid. I'm not going to tell anybody that I had cancer. And I completely compartmentalized it and made it this
Mhm.
past thing that's no longer happening. But because that compartmentalization was so black and white, I then had to reconfront all the healing that still needed to take place during and after college, a couple years in, when it was very clear to me that there's still a lot of healing here that has to take place. You can't just push it aside and make it this thing that was only in the past and that I don't need to focus on anymore. So it's kind of been a roller coaster of disconnection, reconnection, figuring out how to integrate this to be a part of who I am, but not all of who I am.
Yeah. I mean, that's so profound. Not only for you as a survivor, but also for like a lot of the caregivers that they struggle with that as well. Like, I'm not just a mom to a kid who had cancer, right? Like, what does that mean for my life moving forward? How do I integrate it? Where are the areas that like maybe we tend to hyper focus on this identity and the strengths of this identity? Like, we did this. I'm gonna curse on my own podcast, but I'm a badass, right? Like all the things. And then when you realize like, well, what about these other wounded parts over here? Like, what are the parts that we're not paying attention to? The things that
Mhm.
that were subtly damaged and you didn't realize the effect because maybe it was going to take a while for that to like make itself obvious. And for you, for kids, right, that have actually gone through this, it's not
Yeah.
only developmental milestones, but then also just life milestones like getting married, dating,
Mhm.
having children, or trying to
Yeah.
conceive, right? Like
Yeah.
all of these things confront that trauma and
Yep.
a piece of that trauma.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you brought that up because it's still something that I'm very much dealing. My husband and I have been trying to conceive for years now, and it's been difficult. And I was told as a teenager that it would likely be something difficult, but I didn't understand the gravity of what that would be like until I came to that place of wanting to conceive and wanting to grow a family. And now that's here and that reality and truth of what he said could happen is happening, it's like
Mhm.
reconfronting again all of the trauma and frustration and
And the
the anger
grief.
and sadness that, oh, like, why is this still a part of my life? And, like, you just feel like you can't get rid of it sometimes. And
Mhm.
I think it's definitely like throughout life and throughout so many milestones, even for me, 15 years later now, it's still very much a big part of who you are. And so I'm still very much learning how to make it a part of me and not all of me, and to look back on it and have more of a sense of gratitude rather than anger. But it's hard when
Mhm.
there's still long-term symptoms occurring, which can create a lot of anger and frustration still towards the past experience.
Yes. Grief and gratitude both coexisting.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And they can coexist. It's just very difficult to
Mhm.
find a way to do it. And I'm still very much learning that.
Me too. Me too. So what do you think helped you cope? Like, was it mainly therapy that you felt like helped you cope during and after your treatment, or have there been other things that have helped you cope?
I think it was quite a few different things. I think therapy was huge in helping me have some coping skills in place that were specific to me and what I was needing during my treatment, and having someone listen to me and not be scared of my feelings like my parents
Mhm.
were.
Mhm.
Um
That's big
yeah.
because, as a therapist that's like that works with children at times, right? It's like,
Mhm.
hey parents, you've got to keep a poker face because like your kids are going to come to you with some really tough things, and if a parent begins to like cry and get emotional too, it makes the child like pause and be like, "Oh, I don't think this person, like, I need to worry about their well-being now, right? I can't
Mhm.
be honest and just lay it out there without,
Yeah,
being concerned." So
exactly.
that's really that's a really big valuable tidbit right there that you just kind of
Mhm.
dropped like, "Hey, they can't it's hard to be a parent and provide that type of support in this
Mhm.
situation." Like, I'm a therapist and I sit
Yeah.
there sometimes and I'm like holding back the tears like, "Oh, this is too hard," you know?
Mhm, and I think
Um
to add to that too, what also happens, and what I think happened for me, and I didn't realize it until, almost a decade later, is when I saw someone else scared of the feelings that I was having, it made me scared to also look at them and process them, and so
Mm,
then I never did. I was too scared to look at them because it was too scary for anyone else to also look at, and so my counselor helped me for sure, but I still carried a lot with me of being really scared to ever look at those feelings, because I saw all around me that it was a scary thing to do, and so I was too scared to do it the majority of the time. So, yeah, I think counseling can be incredibly helpful at just being a safe space to get out those difficult, hard, ugly, scary feelings in a place
mhm,
where with someone that will just be a person that will take on those feelings, and allow you to just get them all out there without any judgment, without any concern or fear, put on top of them. Um, I think the other coping techniques that were really helpful for me too was my faith. I am a Christian, and I, very much relied on my faith. Even as a 13-year-old, I had my whole like routine every morning. Every morning I'd wake up and I would like read my Bible and read this like special proverb book, and I would journal. And I think those two things partnered of like having a morning routine still, even though
mhm.
I wasn't going to school. My whole routine, my whole life had been turned upside down, but having a morning routine was really helpful. And then also partnering that with my faith was really helpful for me. Um, and then one of the like most special memories that I had that I remember was really just helpful for me and my mental health was my dad also struggles with like anxiety, and he has his whole life, and so I think he was able to empathize with me more when I was going through treatment on kind of what I needed to feel
Mhm.
supported. And so when I would have those moments of just feeling super anxious or really sad, he would go on like a walk with me, and just and I remember one time we went on like a walk at like 9 o'clock at night. It was like late at night, and it was not a normal time to go out on like a walk. And he's like, let's go on like a walk. And we did just walk around and talk about like the stars and the moon, and to just feel seen and loved, and literally held, like being handheld through those feelings.
Aw,
um those moments, I had a few of those nights with my dad, and I think those were really powerful as well.
I love that. Like, parents, take note. Take your kids on a walk and hold their hand. Um, but I mean, I've actually even looked into, there's a form of therapy, I guess, where it's like you're out in nature, and I don't know the exact name of it, but basically it's people are starting to move outside of the traditional box of an office, right? And
Mhm.
getting out with their clients to really bring them back into this space where it's like you're still small, but still great part of this beautiful picture, you know? Um, so I'm going to ask another question. What do you wish others knew about the impact of cancer on you?
Mm, um, I don't think I had realized when I was currently going through it, I was so focused on just like surviving and getting
Mhm.
through it and coming out like the other side alive and healthy. And after everything was done, and I think that was everybody else's goal as well. Obviously they want
Mhm.
me to, make it through and to survive. And they were very much there for me during, but it was after it was all done. It's just kind of like a lot of that support just goes away. And I had come to become really close with many other, teens with cancer throughout my treatment.
Mhm.
And the majority of them relapsed, and so they were all still going through treatment when I was finished. One of my closest friends, she ended up dying the s- the month before I finished my treatment. And so I was still very much going through grief and loss and the anxiety of all of my friends now, because I had gotten so close with people through the cancer community that were also going through it. And so there was still so much going on beyond just surviving and getting through it after
Mhm.
everything was done. And I just wish that I had some more support in place after the fact. I think I definitely needed all of the support during, but I think I needed a lot of it afterwards as well. And I also, as a teenager, 'cause at that time I was 15 and a half now, really was able to see the impact of what I had gone through had taken like a toll on like my family. And so that also was an incredible weight to carry as a teenager to
Yeah.
see, oh, this horrible thing that I had has now caused my family, on my parents, and just, physically and emotionally and mentally on them. And I have a younger sister as well, and kind of like what like you were sharing, she was able to just push forward and cope during those 2 years, those 2.5 years. But right after I finished treatment, she completely fell apart and really, really struggled emotionally and mentally and in school and all those things. And it was confusing to my parents and to her and to me,
Yeah.
because it showed how much of an impact these 2.5 years have had on all of us. And so I wish that I had someone that I could have like reflected with afterwards for many months after, and someone that could have just helped me to know how to support my family and to not feel guilty for what had happened, to feel like I was a burden to my family financially, mentally, emotionally, all those things that cancer brings onto a
Yeah.
family. And as a teenager, you see that and you understand what's
It's
happening.
hard.
And it's hard to
Yeah.
know that you want to survive, but what you're going through is causing so much turmoil to your family.
Yeah.
And as a kid, you may not necessarily fully grasp that, but as a teenager, I did, and that was really hard. And so I think just knowing that it's so much more than just surviving. There's
Yeah.
whole family dynamics that are shifting and changing, and huge perspective life shifts that are happening as a teenager, and social dynamics changing, and grief, a lot of grief happening.
A
I think
lot of grief.
I think a lot of people don't realize that when you come out of cancer and you survive, that there's just so much joy, but there's so much joy and so much grief because you've
Mhm.
witnessed the death and loss of so many fellow cancer, patients as well, and people that you've become close to and loved. And I don't think people realize how much grief comes with the joy of surviving.
Yeah. And guilt. I hear
Yeah.
a lot
Guilt
of
too.
guilt, and
Mhm.
like what I'm hearing you talk about is like not only the grief of the shift in the dynamics in your home and feeling the weight of the responsibility. So the guilt, you talked about that. I hope that's one of your negative cognitions that you've worked on
Yeah,
in
definitely.
EMDR. Um, but even just how do you experience joy when you've lost so many friends through
Yeah.
the same thing, that survivor's guilt and um there's just a lot of grief, you know?
Yeah, exactly. A lot of grief, not just for the people that you've lost, but yeah, those parts of your life that have been lost as well, those friendships, who you used to
Hmm.
be, all those things.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's not always talked about or recognized once treatment is done. Um,
Finding who you are, like that sense of identity of, okay, yeah, I went through this really bad thing, but what parts of me are still there that were there before cancer, and what parts of me are new and will stay, and which ones do I want to like prune off, right? Like how do I get rid of these some of the
Mhm.
stuff that I pick up along the way.
Yes,
Um
definitely.
so how is your mental health now?
So I'm a crier. I am doing much better, but I'm a crier. As you know, I'm just like an emotional person. I'm like a super empathetic person. So I just, whenever I talk about anything that brings up big emotions, especially for me, that's talking about my cancer journey, it still makes me cry even 15 years later. Like I just celebrated my 15 years cancer free on December 15th of this last year. So just a few months ago.
Congratulations.
Um, and yeah, I mean, even 15 years later, I still cry talking about it. And it's not so much that I'm crying because I'm still struggling a lot with it. It's just the reality of that was really hard and that was really sad and that was awful. And because of that, it's okay to cry about it, even 15 years later. And
Mhm.
I've been able to get to a place of feeling okay about that for a long time, especially during my college years. I just didn't want to experience any of the things associated with cancer, the grief, the sadness, the
Yeah.
anger. I just wanted it to be in my past. And I didn't allow myself to look back on it and feel safe and okay to cry about it and just talk about it as a normal, hard experience with people. And so I had to do a lot of therapy, a lot of EMDR, a lot of CBT, um, a lot of family work as well to come to a place of just feeling okay to talk about it. And so thankfully, I definitely am there now. So I'm very grateful that I feel okay being able to talk about it now very openly and with emotion and do it,
With emotion. Yeah.
unashamedly as well. Um, I think, like I was sharing as well, I definitely do still struggle with some long-term side effects. And so that, definitely weighs on me sometimes mentally of, some like neuropathy and pain issues, some uh, like fertility issues now, and
Mhm.
um, like some eyesight stuff that I've been like, dealing with like for many years now. And so that is frustrating. And I still do have like therapy appointments, every once in a while where I notice myself really struggling or getting really anxious and hyper focused on my body, and getting fearful of something bad happening to me again and
Mhm.
needing therapy to work through those feelings. I definitely still need that. I think one of the biggest mental health hurdles that I've had to go through in the last decade is lack of trust with my body, not trusting my body anymore, not trusting that it's
Yeah.
good and that it's functioning well. I'm always worried that it's going to turn on me and like betray me again. And
Yeah.
so that's still something that I think I am still working through, but I've done a lot of work on that and it's definitely much better than it was, 5, 10 years ago. And I don't know if that will ever go away. And so also just coming to a place of acceptance that my anxiety is a part of who I am because of my cancer, just like my cancer is a part of who I am, but it's not all of me. And learning to accept those parts of me and
Right.
be tender and compassionate to those parts of me too.
So if you could go back as this version of yourself and go back to that 13-year-old girl who was going through cancer, what would you tell that younger version of you?
Oh gosh, I had this asked of me in therapy during an EMDR session as well, and I got
Oh my
extremely
goodness. I must be an EMDR therapist.
right. And at the time, I couldn't answer the question. I still, and this was a few years ago when that was asked of me, and didn't really know what to say because I was still so scared of approaching that terrified young teenage girl that had no idea what kind of hell she was about to go through.
Mhm.
But now I feel like I can look at her and just let her know that it's going to be okay. And I know that sounds really cliche and silly and broad, but there's many moments throughout treatment and after treatment where I didn't know if I was going to be okay, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally and
Yeah.
career wise and relationship wise. Like I just didn't know like how is my life going to pan out? What is tomorrow going to bring? And just trusting that God's got his hand on tomorrow. It's going to be okay. I may not know what's going to happen. I may not be in the best, state of mind, but I'm loved through it. I have a family who loves and cares about me, and I have plans in place to support me through it. And no matter what, no matter what grief, fear, anxiety, or anger happens, you're loved and you're seen and you're going to be okay.
That's really beautiful and profound. I'm so glad that you were able to answer that question after being able to reflect on it for 2 years.
Oh
Um,
man, so much reflection the last
I
15
know.
years, man.
So I'm gonna wrap it up with this final question. What words of wisdom would you be able to provide to others, either parents or um, children currently going through it, or even adult childhood cancer survivors? What words of wisdom would you like to provide?
Yeah, I think a big one for me that has been a passion of mine also since becoming a certified child life specialist is don't forget about the brothers and sisters. My
Hmm.
sister also went through hell during that
Bravo.
experience, and my whole family was in survival mode, and so was she.
Yeah.
And I think my child life specialist had met with her maybe once or twice, but not very much. And she needed just as much support as I did. She was also a terrified kid. She was
Yeah.
probably terrified of it also happening to her as well.
Yeah.
And all of the kids are going through that. And I think a huge thing too is to invite the siblings into being a part of the experience. I think so many parents want to shelter their siblings and
Hmm.
have them stay with grandma, push them into all these different corners away from the experience as far as possible because they don't want them to go through it. But the reality is they are. They're going through it too, and they need to be invited in so that they can have some choice in what they want to be a part of and can feel important enough to be invited into such a difficult experience as well. So that's a big one for me is the siblings. I deeply love and care about my sister and wish
Yeah.
that I could have been more aware of it too, but I was 13 and going through hell as well. So
Yes. And I'm
um
gonna just piggyback on that one because I did bring in my kid, one of them. I was like, "Hey, do you want to come?" Right? And he's like, "Okay," because he at that point he's like, "What's clinic? What happens there?" Um, so invite them into the process, but also realize that they need a place also to have space and grace to process what they experience because it's traumatic for them too. And
totally.
I dropped the ball on this. I'm like, okay, come to clinic. And he was there, saw his brother getting his port accessed and the screaming and, just the whole shebang. He got the full works. And he
Mhm.
wanted to go home later that evening because we had a hospital admission that day. And there was some behavioral challenges at home that evening. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I forgot to let him process this and give up, I just didn't
Yeah.
prepare for the other side. Like all the
Yes.
things that I didn't think about. So, but
Yes.
so be if you do invite kids, anticipate. that there may be some behavioral challenges with that child later on that evening
Yeah.
or the days that follow as they try to make sense and grapple with what it was that they just witnessed. So,
Yes,
um,
exactly. And a huge part of being a child life specialist is not only processing after, but preparing beforehand. So preparing the child to know what they're going to see, what they're going to be experiencing, what kind of
yes,
sensations they'll be seeing and witnessing
yes.
before, and having that space to process after. And if parents don't know how to do that, it's okay to ask for help. So having a person at the hospital help to prepare them before walking in as well can be super helpful. So that's what I would say is the siblings are extremely important too. So
So if you work in the hospital staff and you see someone bring in a sibling, make sure you've asked them, have they been here before?
yes,
Have they processed? Have they had a child
yes.
life specialist help you guys understand what's to come?
Mhm.
Um, because parents aren't going to know to advocate for that, right? That's really going
Right.
to fall heavily on the hospital staff who's like, "Oh, hi, sibling is here." So,
Exactly. Yes.
but I really, really, truly appreciate getting to know you, getting to know your story, for you being so vulnerable and candid about just your journey, your mental health journey through recovering and, having been through childhood cancer. So, what are the ways that people can get a hold of you if they wanted to reach out to you personally?
Yeah. So I have a children's breathwork account on Instagram. It's called abc.breathworkforkids. So you're always welcome to message me on there. And I also work for a remote child life company called Hearts Connected, and you're also welcome to contact me there as well. And my email there is carissa@heartsconnected.org. So I'm here to talk to you as a professional to provide guidance and support, but also here to just listen and to just answer any questions that you have, personally as well. So
Well, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. And you guys I will make sure and post all that information in the links below on this podcast. So thank you so much, Carissa. And I can't wait to see what you continue to do in this childhood cancer community. Thank you.
thank you for having me. Thank you.